Hello YouTube, VidHead85 here, and I want to talk about, I recently saw a article that said 15 things the Republican Party does not want you to know about the deficit, or these things right now. The first one is, on Tuesday, the national debt surpassed a record $16 trillion on Friday, a massive figure that the Republican politicians are using to slam the Obama administration. On Tuesday, Republican vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan said that of all the broken promises of Obama, this is probably the worst one. The Republicans even featured two clocks counting the debt at their convention. But while Republican politicians claim that an Obama spending binge is responsible for the ballooning deficit, the truth is not so simple. Check out what the GOP doesn't want you to know about the deficit. One, that the deficit has grown mostly because of the recession. The deficit has ballooned not because of specific spending measures, but because of the recession. The deficit more than doubled between 2008 and 2009 as the economy was in free fall since laid-off workers paid less in taxes and needed more benefits. The deficit then shrank in 2010 and 11. The stimulus costs much less than Bush wars and tax cuts. Number two, Republicans frequently blame the stimulus for the $787 billion stimulus for the national debt. But when all government spending is taken into account, the stimulus frankly wasn't that big. In contrast, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, the U.S. has spent nearly $4 trillion on these wars by the time these conflicts end, according to a report by Brown University. The Bush cuts also have cost nearly $1.3 trillion over 10 years. 3. The deficit grew under George W. Bush. When George W. Bush took office, the federal government was running a surplus of $86 billion. When he left, that turned into $642 billion deficit. 3. The deficit is shrinking. Last year's federal budget deficit was 12% lower than in 2009, according to the Office of Management and Budget. The deficit is projected to shrink even more over the next several years. Next is investors are paying us to borrow money. The interest rate on a 10-year Treasury bond is negative, according to the Treasury Department. Investors are even paying us for 30-year Treasury bonds when adjusted for inflation. Another thing is that the investors are not running away. Conservative commentators have been warning for years that investors will run away from Treasury bonds because of the national debt. However, that has not happened. Interest rates on Treasury bonds continue to hover at historic lows. Another thing they don't want you to know about healthcare is that it reduces the deficit. Republicans have blasted the Affordable Care Act as budget busting, but healthcare actually reduces the deficit, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Another thing is the U.S. is borrowing less from China. The U.S. government is borrowing much less from foreign countries than before the recession, according to the government data cited by Paul Krugman. This is because U.S. private sector is financing our bigger deficits. The next one is that we spend a lot on defense. Defense spending contributed to 20% of our federal spending last year, or $718 billion, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. This adds up to 41% of the world's defense spending, according to Bloomberg TV anchor Adam Johnson. Mitt Romney has vowed to not cut defense spending if elected president. Another thing is we spend a lot on health care. Health insurance, including Medicare and Medicaid, constituted 21% of all federal spending last year. In contrast, education constituted 2% of federal spending. Meanwhile, Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan have promised not to change Medicare for ages 55 and older. The next thing is Republicans may want large deficits for now. The federal budget deficit ballooned under Ronald Reagan, and that may be just the way Republicans like it. That is, cutting taxes in order to use larger deficits to justify spending cuts later. Since Republicans ultimately want to lower taxes and a small government, what is better way than to cut spending than to make it look urgent and necessary? So those are some things that the Republicans, the radical Republicans, do not want you to know about the deficit. In fact, it has been getting smaller. In 2008 and 2009, that was before President Obama was pushing his policies so that more Americans can get to work. And if congressional Republicans are worried about jobs, then they shouldn't have filibustered the American Jobs Act and the veterans jobs bill, and as well as there was a bill that would penalize any companies who would send jobs overseas. The Senate Republicans filibustered that. So if anything, we know that Republicans in the congressional Republicans don't want jobs, or at least if there are some in there, they're being overridden by their party. And I say, vamos, if you can, or maybe do a split of a Tea Party, or not of a Tea Party, but something a little left of the radical Republican Party. Now, have a great day, you two. See you later. And also, I found out that the national debt and the budget deficit is very different. The national debt has went up $6 trillion, but that's, I believe, that's mainly been because of the recession as well. So, see you later, YouTube.